when you're working with the breath and you're connecting the breath in that way, and we start to go into a slightly altered hypnotic state, we're starting to access parts of our brain, not necessarily the prefrontal cortex, the egoic part of our mind, the part that's trying to, projections or making stories or intellectualizing, analyzing. When we're working with the breath and we're working with this connected pattern of breath, we start to go into more of a gamma state, and we start to go into more of this altered state, so that we start to sometimes we start to access and unlock memories. Sometimes it's what's been stored in our nervous system, triggers that are stored in our nervous system, what's stored in our tissues, in our fascia, and having experiencing some of these emotions and feelings that maybe we have been pushing down and suppressing for a very long time. We live in a very anxious world, and anxiety is I've never seen anxiety with my clients in the way that I do now. I guess because I work on the front line every single day with clients, I get to really see it, because everyone's very good at sort of hiding it, stress and anxiety. That's the thing. It's like when you have these mental health issues and you have anxiety or panic attacks, depression, they hold you back from doing things that you actually really love doing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. So today we have the hugely popular practice of breathwork to look into. So after millennia of it being used in bodily practices like martial arts and yoga, conscious breathing was launched into our modern scientific worldview by the work of psychologist Stan Grof, who developed holotropic breathing in the 1960s at Harvard. And we have a whole episode on transpersonal psychology if you're more interested in the history around psychology at that time. Breathwork then continued to gain in popularity following the focus on the lungs and breathing in neuroregulation proposed by Dr. Stephen Porges in his Polyvagal Theory. Again, we have a detailed episode on Polyvagal Theory. If you want to go into the detail of that with Dr. Porges, highly recommend that episode. And then it gained even further in popularity with Dr. Peter Levine's development of Somatic Experiencing, which I'm delighted to announce he will be coming on the show in the next series to discuss. I've been waiting for so long to speak to Dr. Levine, so I'm really excited about that one. So having been present for some time in the trauma community, in the last few years, it has just exploded onto the well-being scene too, because of its many, many benefits, both physiologically and psychologically. So who better to talk to about this than expert in a wide range of breathwork techniques and body-based therapies, Rebecca Dennis. She facilitates workshops, events, and retreats alongside her public speaking and individual sessions. She's a gifted speaker and coach, and her expertise center around obviously breathwork, but also trauma release, somatic modalities, polyvagal theory, and nervous system regulation. So absolutely perfect for Chasing Consciousness. Part of her wide popularity is due to her having written 3 successful books on the topic, the latest being Let It Go and Breathe, a practical guide to breathwork, which has been featured in the Amazon and Sunday Times bestseller lists, and which we're going to be going into a bit of detail on today. She's also been showcased on BBC radio presenter Fern Cotton's podcast, which also has a festival attached to it, Happy Place. And she's also collaborated with Google, BBC, Stylist Magazine, and Sweaty Betty. So she's right at the top of her game. Now, I have wanted to speak to Rebecca about how breathwork actually works scientifically ever since my sessions with her took me on this crazy journey of awareness and transformation. And I really had no idea why. So without further ado, let's go. Rebecca Dennis, welcome to Chasing Consciousness. How are you this evening?
I am very well. Thank you, Freddie. It's very lovely to see you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to get a personal friend and acquaintance on the podcast. It's only the second time it's happened. So it's an absolute joy. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, let's lay the groundwork for the listeners. Breathwork. Can you start, Rebecca, speaking about the nuts and bolts of what the actual breathing technique or the pattern of the technique of conscious connected breath entails? Because it is slightly different to the way we breathe normally every day, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And how I teach, the methods that I teach many different breathing techniques. So I won't always be teaching conscious connected breath work in classes. And sometimes I won't be working with an open mouth breath. Sometimes I adapt it and tweak it, which maybe we can talk about a bit later, as in the whys. But with conscious connected breath, there's many different schools now. And so there's different ways that people teach it and probably will describe their way of what a breathing pattern is. But for me, with conscious connected breath work, what it's helping us to do is to clear restrictions in our breathing, clear restrictions in our breathing patterns, have an understanding of our breathing patterns and how they can mirror very much our patterns on our behaviors in life. And on that deeper level, rather, it's like a therapy, but without us having to go through intellectualizing some of the stories, our perceptions of those stories. So we're not working with the thinking mind in the way that we can when we do with psychotherapy. It's always our perception of our story. It's really going deep into the wisdom of our nervous system, of our heart, of our gut, and of our breath, because our breath is there and it's deeply connected with all of the systems of our body. And so it's helping us to remember how we used to breathe when we were babies. When we're toddlers. And the majority of us, when we first come into the world, we have got this beautiful, open, expansive breath. So we're breathing in the belly, in the lower belly, in the midsection, and up into the chest. So if you see a little baby and they're lying on the cot and they're fast asleep, you'll notice that the whole of the body looks like it's breathing. You can see all the muscles moving together in unison. And with little toddlers, when they're running around, you'll notice that they're breathing and they're just breathing, their bellies are out and they're expanding the breath. It's this really beautiful, deep, diaphragmatic breath. They're not trying to hold their belly in. Some of these things start to happen over conditioning over the years. Unless you've had like a really traumatic birth and entry into the world, then usually we come in with this really beautiful, open, flowing breath because we are completely present and we have no inhibitions. We express how we feel. We express as a baby or a toddler if we're hungry, if we're tired, if we're feeling content, or if we're feeling frustrated. We just express that. So we have no inhibitions about that. We have no awareness of guilt, shame, trying to control emotions as well. So we're completely in the flow of life and we're completely in the flow of our emotions, and we're not trying to hold the breath. We're not trying to suppress any feelings. We're not trying to control emotion. We're not trying to control pain. And so really it's not necessarily about new tricks with conscious connected breath. It's helping us just to simply remember how we used to breathe before life got to us, and helping us to unravel some of those stories and those patterns and the tension that we're storing in all of the microscopic little muscles within our respiratory system by working with this conscious connected breath and just going deeper and deeper into the psychology, which is connected with our physiology, and having that connection with some of this maybe stored emotion, stored trauma, stored tension that we're carrying in the body. And when we work with the breath, we can help to release it. When we're 3 to 7, we start to become so much more aware of our peers and our cultures and our our being at school, authorities, parental authorities, what we're being told to do, things like you need to be brave, man up, you're a good girl because you didn't cry, speak up, all of these instructions that we get. So all of these instructions that we, and conditionings that we get every time we do, we're learning behavior, and we're mirroring behavior, and the rhythms and the patterns and the depths of our breathing are changing constantly. They're correlating with every emotion and every feeling and every experience. And so the breath is always there, just always changing, always, sending these messages from the brain to the body and the body to the brain. And so when we work with the breath, when we work with a conscious connected breath, it goes on this very, very deep level of helping us to unravel and uncoil and help to really rewire and recalibrate our nervous system as well. So we can just have a deeper connection inside, and also help to manage our feelings and our emotions in a more efficient way, because obviously in this world right now, it's in very, very intense times, and we can't always control what's happening externally. It can feel incredibly overwhelming, but we can control how we're reacting and how we're being triggered inside on a daily basis. And actually it's really, really important for us to do. It's really important for us to literally put our oxygen mask on first. If you think about when ecosystems around the world are feeling out of balance because of stress and tension and trauma and so on, then those ecosystems start to become out of balance. And it's in that way within ourselves. The way that I see it is that we all carry our own little ecosystems, and the more that we can nurture them and pay attention to them, then we can feel more balanced inside.
It's extraordinary how something that we do every day just to stay alive can also change our conscious state of mind so much, so extremely. Let's start there. What exactly is happening in the body physiologically? So on the one hand, we've got this sort of calming breath where you slow it down, and that just has a direct effect on the autonomic nervous system. But then there's also a stimulating side. And I'm trying to work out if that's the same system, or if that's a completely different part physiologically being stimulated.
Yeah, so the breath is it's almost like it's the driver for all of our systems, and it's communicating to all of the systems in our body. And so when we think about the vagus nerve and our parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, when we're working with the breath and those messages that we're sending, the vagus nerve is coming from the brainstem, communicating down with all of the organs in our body through the diaphragm, and it's either erring on the side of parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest state, or sympathetic. So that's in very simple terms. There are different tiers of the nervous system, and there's also a dorsal state, the ventral state, the parasympathetic state, and within that state there is a dorsal state, which is when we can go into a more depressive, listless state as well. But maybe we won't go quite into all of those states right now. But when we're working with the breath, when how you're breathing and the way you're breathing is really indicative to how you feel, and it's really indicative to how you think. In fact, the way that you breathe sometimes can change your whole nervous system without even without even consciously being aware of that's what's happening. So, for example, over time, we can accumulate some of these breathing patterns which I find a lot in people that I meet, where they're breathing so much more up in the chest and they're overusing some shoulder muscles that they really don't need to be using, and they're overusing, there's quite a lot of tightness in the intercostal muscles, and there's quite a lot of tension in the diaphragm. So the breath is moving more up and down, more like a vertical breath, as opposed to this horizontal breath, which is a good breathing. That's good breathing, that which maybe we can come back to as well. But when we're breathing in that way and over time, so for example, when we're breathing up in the chest, there tends to be quite a lot of tension, contraction in the muscles. We can have this, the body, the message to our physiology is more that we're in this flight or fight state as well. When we breathe more using a deep diaphragmatic breath, so when you're using this deep diaphragmatic breath where you're working with the diaphragm, it's sitting underneath your rib cage. It's this really strong tonic muscle that's there situated under your rib cage. It's the primary purpose is there just to help us to breathe. And it's like the mothership, starship of breathing. But we also have little diaphragmatic muscles which are in the back of the jaw, and we have diaphragmatic muscles which are tiny little muscles which are also in the pelvis as well. So when you think of your respiratory system, think of these little muscles around in the pelvis, so like little doors blowing open and shut, so behind the jaw as well, which are correlating with your diaphragm. So when we start to use this deep diaphragmatic breath and we start to encourage that a lot more, then the message, like literally on a very primal level, the message from the brain to the body to the brain, is that we are safe. We can stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system. We can go into this rest and digest state. So that's why it's really important to, when you work with the breath and you consciously breathe and you observe your patterns, am I breathing more in my belly? Am I breathing more in my chest? Am I shallow breathing? Have I been holding my breath? Have I been clenching my jaw because I've just been storing lots of emotions and not expressing how I feel, and therefore creating tension in the back of my jaw, which is having an accumulating effect on the rest of my respiratory system. And then so when we become more aware of that, then we can start to let go of some of these muscles like that we've been overusing. So we can start to let go of tension in some of the muscles that we've been overusing over time. And we can start to get them to all be working in balance and in the way that they should all be working, so we can have this really lovely open breath. And when we do that, then we strengthen our vagal tone. So when we are aware of that, then when we're strengthening our vagal tone, then it's easier for us to bounce in between those states of sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic gets a lot of flack. It sends us into flight, fight, or freeze, and freeze is something that's not always mentioned, but flight or fight helps us to produce adrenaline, helps us to produce cortisol, pumping around the body, muscles contracting because we're getting ready to fight, the blood pressure rises, often our breath is gravitating more up here. But also it's really good for us when we need to get the job done. You know, when we need to focus and we need to get the job done, then adrenaline, cortisol is good. But if there's too much of it pumping around, and if we keep getting triggered and we keep being in that flight or fight mode, or in that state of chronic stress, which lots of people are because they're on and they're wired all the time, then that can have a detrimental effect on all of your systems in your body. So when we're breathing using a deep diaphragmatic breath, we can start to help with bring balance into the stresses or the hormones or whatever's being released. But consciously breathing and really breathing well and just being present with your breath and consciously breathing, inhaling for say a count of 5 and exhaling for a count of 5 just for a minute can really help to just clear cortisol from your bloodstream. So yes, anatomically with the nervous system, it's so connected to our breathing, and we can have control, which is really, really powerful thing to know and to master, is that we do have that control. Things like anxiety, when you're having when you're in that flight or fight, when you're feeling stress, it's just like things are happening in the brain. The prefrontal cortex starts to shut down. You have those feelings of brain fog. I can't remember what I was going to say because of just this is all shut down because the amygdala part of the brain is scanning. It's like saying, oh, it's danger, danger. So when we work with the breath, again, we're helping to calm all of those systems down and change those messages that actually, no, we don't need to be in flight or fight. We can go into this, we can start to stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system.
And for any listeners interested, we do have an episode with Dr. Stephen Porges, the founder of Polyvagal Theory. So if anyone wants to go into more detail on what Rebecca's just been explaining, that's in the Stephen Porges Polyvagal Theory episode. And interesting effects, I've been using this with my acting, which is really interesting. Since I discovered Polyvagal Theory, I've been using the bidirectionality to actually get myself into states. So, for example, if I'm nervous on set and I've got this really calm, chilled scene with my girlfriend or with one of my kids or something, I use the slow breath just to bring myself into that peaceful, calm place. But then if I've got a really agitated scene where I'm really stressed out, I literally do breathing for a couple of seconds before they say action, and it works. It's extraordinarily direct.
Yeah. So the polyvagal theory it was a brilliant piece of work, and also Deb Dana, who wrote the Anchored, she's broken down that as well, for which she's sort of all fully with his permission. But it's also a brilliant read.
Well, I will definitely get that in the show notes. Thanks for that.
But I think that's what's so empowering is like when you understand the landscapes and the tiers of your nervous system, how you can be in a state where you can, as you could say, you can put yourself into a sympathetic state, and you can do that by changing your breath. Just when you're inhaling, if you're inhaling like that, you're stimulating your sympathetic nervous system. When you exhale, you're stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system. So, when you're slowing down the breath, when you're being more aware, when you're bringing your breath down into your lower lungs, when you're using your diaphragm, it's really misconstrued when people are told to take a deep breath and everything's going to feel calm and they won't feel anxious. Because sometimes that can actually bring in more feelings of panic and more feelings of anxiety, because if there's tension in the diaphragm and you've been an upper chest breather for a very long time, it's hard to get the breath down there. You get that feeling of air hunger, and actually it can create more panic and anxiety. So that's why it's really key to get those foundations of breath work first before you start doing any more of the advanced techniques such as conscious connected breathing, because conscious connected breathing is a really powerful healing tool. But if you don't have that understanding of the foundations of your own breathing patterns, then it can be detrimental to your health. It can make you feel panicked. It can make you feel anxious. And if you're breathing much more up in the chest, then it's not going to have the effect that a beneficial effect. It can actually sometimes re-traumatize, but we can go into that later as well. Try not to jump too much.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to come back to that. So let's linger there for a moment. We've got the physiological side, and we see that that's directly correlated with the mental state. So let's go into the sort of psychology here, because this state of quite serious oxygenation leads to these radically different states of mind. And during my group session with you, I felt this strange mix of hyperstimulation, so super clearly defined state of mind. I was watching very intently everything that was happening. So I was very, very focused and concentrated. But on the other hand, there was this totally abstract free association where all kinds of feelings and images and emotions were just coming up, seemingly out of nowhere, seemingly unconnected. Tell us generally, what are the commonly reported effects when we go into that connected breathing sort of technique after we've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 minutes? And how do they translate into these transformative outcomes? Now we're on the sort of psychology side.
Okay, but before we go into the psychology side, because it's just one thing that you said, which was about bringing in sort of super oxygenating. And when some people are teaching about conscious connected breath and they're saying that they're actually bringing in more oxygen, we're not. So I just think it's really important to we're actually, in some cases, actually, there is, it's actually reducing the blood flow coming up into the brain, because there's vasoconstriction in our blood flow. And when it depends on how you're teaching the breath work and how you're teaching conscious connected breath work. I never get people to hyperventilate. you don't need to be pushing your exhale out. You don't need to be forcing it out. It's more about just getting the breath to be connected. So it's just one continuous breath. But when we are hyperventilating, or people are hyperventilating, going into these states, then you're actually blowing more CO2 out, that's what's creating that vasoconstriction and some of these feelings. So on a psychological level, when we're working with the breath, so I just wanted to make that clear, because there's so many people that are saying you're bringing in more oxygen into your body, and it's just like, you're not. It's just like, that's not.
But just to clarify, Bex, could it be that that I was doing it in whatever way it was? Because it felt to me that it was a faster rhythm than usual.
Yeah, no.
As a result, I felt more oxygenated. I felt more stimulated. Is that possible?
I think we just will feel more that once we start to release tension in all of the muscles in our body, and we start to feel more freer in our body, then we're going to feel a lot more lighter. And I think that's probably more of a definition, because you have managed to, when you're working with the breath and you're connecting the breath in that way, and we start to go into a slightly altered hypnotic state, we're starting to access parts of our brain, not necessarily the prefrontal cortex, the egoic part of our mind, the part that's trying to, projections or making stories or intellectualizing, analyzing. When we're working with the breath and we're working with this connected pattern of breath, we start to go into more of a gamma state, and we start to go into more of this altered state, so that we start to sometimes we start to access and unlock memory. Sometimes it's what's been stored in our nervous system, triggers that are stored in our nervous system, what's stored in our tissues, in our fascia, and having experiencing some of these emotions and feelings that maybe we have been pushing down and suppressing for a very long time. So when we're working with the breath, and sometimes you might feel like you feel this extreme sensation of love and joy, but you also might feel during that session anger and sadness or tears, or you might take yourself back to a memory when you were a child, or there might be some very strong visuals. Everybody's having a very different experience often when I'm working with groups, everyone is when you talk and when you share, it's so powerful, because some people might be having a very physical experience. Sometimes it's a very mental experience. Sometimes it's quite hard to get out of the mind. We spend so much time in our heads, so much time, our brain's job is there to protect us. So it's trying to, that is a very protective coping mechanism of just more wanting to know what might go wrong. And so it's very clever at kind of distracting us. Resistance, like sometimes we notice resistance as well. And it's really getting beyond that part of, the mind, which can be very, very strong, and really coming into the body, that sense of really dropping into your body, really connecting into your body, so that you can feel the breath there. And then that's when it can start to feel really liberating, because you can start to feel this release that can be happening.
Well, Bex, I know this is a tough question, because obviously we don't necessarily completely understand how memory works, nor do we completely understand, although I'm hoping we're going to be speaking with Peter Levine, listeners, in the next series, which is a really exciting bit of news. And we'll be talking about his somatic experiencing thing, which works on this idea that trauma is stored in the body. We still don't know quite how that works. Can you try and explain how the connected breathing, conscious breathing technique stimulates those memories, flashes, emotions to arise? Such a tough question. Sorry.
No, and I think it's really important. So how I work with the breath, and how I always start working with people with the breath, is I get them to always work with breath awareness first. So it's really coming into your felt senses and coming into your sensations, which are taking you away from the thinking mind. So it's really allowing yourself to feel all the feelings that are there in your body, but also all of the feelings that perhaps that we've been trying to push away. And so
you're encouraging the hypnagogic, which helps us to bring down the default mode network, become less active.
You're disarming the nervous system. You're trying, first of all, it's really important, safety first, right?
Yeah,
safety first, trust first, not going straight into like some of this cathartic, getting like the fireworks, or, you know, again, that kind of goes a bit into ego if we're trying to push those feelings to come, or those emotions and that trauma, or whatever it is. Sometimes I think trauma gets really overused sometimes as a word, and sometimes I think we could call it stored experiences or unprocessed experiences, rather than, because we'd always talk, so there's almost like an overload of my trauma, but actually some of it can just be, I just think of it, like as that. And so when we're working with the breath, and you're working with the breath in that way, and you're connecting inside, you are connecting into, I would say, in the way that you work with EMDR. And when in the way that we work with, you know, I work with body work. I work with, it's just not just working with the breath. I'm getting people to work with self-acupressure as well. So we're helping to release tension in that body, as you're breathing into parts of your body. So for example, if I just say, for example, when we think about the jaw, so let's just start with the jaw carries so many stories. And when we are suppressing, say, anger, or we're suppressing grief, or we're swallowing our words, or we're just, you know, we're smiling through, but really there's like so much like anger that's maybe that we're feeling, but we can't express it. So all of these microscopic little muscles and all around the fascia and the memory that's going into our nervous system, which I'll talk about in a minute, but just say, for example, in the jaw, then we're just going to accumulate quite a lot of tension in the jaw. And as we're working with the breath and we're breathing through it, and sometimes I'll be getting people to massage their jaw as they're working through it and they're working with the breath, then it just starts in that way. It's the body's intelligence is helping you. It helps you to release, and you can feel sometimes this rage, this sadness, this grief that's coming out that you're just not being able to express or access before. So that's in that way that when you're working with the breath, you can start feeling different sensations around the body starting to release. In the solar plexus area, which is just underneath the rib cage as well, which is like a bundle of nerves that radiates out like the sun, but there's lots of fascia, which is also communicating with all of our organs. It also gets very stimulated by our sympathetic. So in times, so say, for example, when you've been experiencing anxiety, maybe say that when you're working with the breath, where it's almost like the body is tracking back the roots of anxiety. It's tracking back those stories. So say, for example, you are going to present in a boardroom and all of a sudden your physiology is doing something. You're getting really hot. You're getting really shaky. It's, you know what you're going to say, but your body is being triggered. Your nervous system is being triggered because it remembers that when you were 8 and you put your hand up in the class, and then the teacher really put you down and everybody laughed at you and you went bright red. That was a really awful experience. And so every time and then maybe something else happened and something else happened. So your nervous system remembers that experience that has happened and then is carrying that experience inside. And so when we're working with the breath, it's helping us to get down into the roots of our nervous system, and places like, for example, like the solar plexus, when I'm working with people and I'm working with affirmations and mindset, as well as the body work, as well as the breath, saying to someone like, it's safe for me to trust, it's safe to let go. A little part of it, because we're coming out of the brain, and you'll notice the movement of the breath, it's all of a sudden the body might go into brace mode and be like, it's not safe, I'm not safe. but this time we're rather than us going, trying to push that sensation or that feeling away, we're breathing into it and we're breathing through it. And then eventually, once we keep breathing and moving through some of those past experiences that we're carrying in the body, our mind, our adult brain, our brain here now knows that we're safe, knows that it can intellectualize a story. But when we're working with the breath, it's helping us to understand what we're carrying in our body, what we're carrying in our nervous system, what we're carrying in the muscles, what we're carrying in our fascia. And that is this journey where it goes beyond thinking. It's just goes into feeling mode and just helps to recalibrate and rewire everything. But not all at once, and it takes time, and it's it's a different experience every time. But there are times when people will just, that when they're working with the breath and then they will have these really powerful insights as to that's why I have been disconnected from my lower belly, from my hips. Like, for example, sometimes when people have gone through birth trauma, or when you've experienced operations, or if you've experienced abuse, then, breathing sometimes in those parts of your body feels quite alien, or there are places that you just won't be breathing into. And so it's really important to hold a really safe container with people, because it's a very intimate, vulnerable experience. And, when I'm working with body work, and everyone who works with me is a very experienced body worker, it's so important, the power of, not the power, but the power of touch, but also consent, just letting people know that, hey, I'm going to just place my hands on your chest, and I'm going to place my hand on your belly, because sometimes that's going to make someone just really go into, maybe, just make them recoil or go back into brace mode. And it's really, when I'm working, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and there's stuff that I can explain, and but also it's how it's this presence that you have. And it's when you're looking at a breathing pattern, you can read a breathing pattern, you can see sometimes what's happening in the body, and you can start talking in that way as well. But really it's working as a facilitator as well. And also, but most importantly, when you're working with yourself and you're working with body and working with the breath, really just listening in, and not pushing it and not forcing it.
Now, not unsurprisingly, given everything you just said, you came to this practice through a process of, quite intense crisis in your own life. If it's not too personal, Rebecca, tell us the story of how you found this practice just when you needed it the most. Yeah.
So I'd always had this fascination, I think, with alternative health. I'd tried so many different therapies. I mean, I've tried literally, I think I've almost tried every single therapy in the book. And I'd already done quite a lot of training in somatic body work and various sort of different techniques. And so I was already on that path. But I was also working in media at the time, and I've been doing that for quite a few years, I think like 20 years or something like that. I had a history of depression, so I was diagnosed with depression, I think when I was 20, and so was just put on antidepressants, and would go back to the doctors and just always get my next batch. And I also used to have terrible anxiety. I used to have terrible panic attacks as well. But I was very, very good at disguising it. Probably if you've met me, know me, unless you really knew me. I was pretty good at disguising it. But the depression was particularly debilitating. And even though I was taking that medication, every time I tried to come off it, I just found it very, very hard to function. So I was always trying to come off it. But I'd resigned myself for the rest of my life that I would be taking medication, because, there was a history of depression in my family on both sides. My father my father's side and my mother's side. So, like I say, I figured I was going to be taking it for the rest of my life. But even though I was taking it, I was still, it wasn't really working, and it was probably working. It was working on some level, but I would still have these episodes where I would have incredible dips, and I would have suicidal thoughts. And 2 months before I came across breathwork, which was 15 years ago, I ended up in hospital because I tried to take my life. And and there had been a history of various overdoses and unconscious urges to not be here anymore. So when I came across 2 months later, I'd already left the world media. I was already working in a place called the Special Yoga Center, working with children with special needs, working with yoga, but also with other therapies. And then breathwork came in there. So a breathwork workshop came into, happened to be there. And I was very stressed out because I was doing this fundraising event, having to raise a lot of money for the charity. And I went into the workshop 15 years ago, and it just blew me away. I mean, it was just, I could feel everything. It was such a powerful, full-bodied experience in the way it was very emotional for me, physical for me, very visceral. And I knew that I just found something incredibly powerful. And it was something that I just never experienced before. So I just left there, and then I just kept going back for various, sessions in any way that I could, and really focused on my own practice. And I had an incredible doctor at the time who was she was wonderful. And I told her that I'd found this. I was also working alongside a therapist. I'm not saying, by the way, that medication is bad and you shouldn't take medication for your mental health. And there's no shame in taking medication. And sometimes it's really necessary. So just want to make that abundantly clear. But for me, I managed to come off it. And didn't, within 6 months, I think I was off it, and I've never taken it since. And it really, what it helped me to do, and like I was saying, I tried so many different therapies, but what it helped me to do, and I practice working with the breath every day, was help to trust my mind, really helped me to trust my mind and get to the roots of the depression and also anxiety and panic attacks. Breath work is what really helped me. There's no way I would be doing a podcast right now 15 years ago. And there's no way I'd be, I've been on things like This Morning and, presented in front of like hundreds of people, and I enjoy it now. That's the thing. It's like when you have these mental health issues and you have anxiety or panic attacks, depression, they hold you back from doing things that you actually really love doing. So that's my story. It's that in a nutshell, and that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I'd probably go as far to say as it saved my life. And on the way, I tried many different other modalities, and then I worked with the breath, but I also brought in, the body work, different other techniques that I've been working with ever since, and continue to adapt and tweak it.
So try and describe for us, Bex, the different parts of your life. We're going to go into all of the different benefits for people in general, but just regarding that story, you've mentioned the depression and coming off medication. You've mentioned the complete revolution in your confidence levels and your ability to face very, very nerve-wracking things. What other different levels can you describe things that transform completely in your life? Is there anything else to mention apart from the depression and the change in your sort of level of anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, your psychology and your physiology is so interconnected. So, things like your digestive system, if you're in that state of flight or fight or freeze, then the systems that we're not going to be your body's not going to be prioritizing is your digestion. So when people have IBS or digestive issues, and that's often can be really corrected and helps with the breath. Sleep. I mean, sleep is a medicine in itself, and if we are able to work with the breath and work with the nervous system, then we can help to really manage our thoughts, manage our ruminating thoughts. My mind, I would have some very dark thoughts, and they would, be very, very strong. I learned how to retrain my neural pathways by with the power of the breath. That was, that was very important, integral part of noticing how I spoke to myself and working with the breath to strengthen that. Also, 60%, I think it's, of your lymph nodes are situated underneath your diaphragm. And so therefore, when you're working with a deep diaphragmatic breath, you're helping with the whole of your lymphatic system. So that's helping you to flush out toxins. So, it's in that way, I probably feel healthier than I've ever felt. And who knows, if what actually the wonders of what it's actually has been doing in the background. But just those things like digestion, your immune system, how it's really helpful for your immune system, how it's really helpful for sleep, for your thinking. When you've got a cluttered mind, then that can have a whole roll-on effect as well when you're wired and tired.
And we're going to be coming back, listeners, in a minute to this list of benefits, which is just an extraordinary list. But first, let's talk about your new book, Let It Go, Breathe Yourself Calm, which does a really good job of explaining it all for the listeners, everything we're talking about today in detail. If you want to learn more, listeners, that'll be in the show notes if you want to go off and get that book. Let's just come back for a moment to this idea, as the name of, breathing yourself calm, the title implies. Can you just go back to a moment to talking about how the connected breath leads to this kind of calming effect? What's the mechanism there?
Yeah, I mean, with Let It Go, which I wrote that actually a couple of years ago, that came out, but it got reprinted and it's still going strong. But I actually don't really go too much into the depths about connected breathing. I feel like that's something that you need to be working with someone and with a certified facilitator. I do talk about rolling breath, but really it's more talking about the foundations of breath, what you can do in everyday life, what you can do in different challenges. For example, when your immune system is feeling like it's compromised or when you need sleep, or working with children, or if you're feeling anxious, or you're needing to bring more energy in. So there's probably about 50-60 different types of breathing exercises that are very simple to use and not going to make you feel discombobulated, and just having that real deep in understanding of, like, it's the foundations of breath work book. I would say that's what that more is. Okay,
great. And presumably you do speak about breathing yourself calm in there. Just a quick word on breathing yourself calm.
I mean, I think once we have an understanding of how you're breathing and the way that you're breathing and noticing your breathing patterns, and just everyday things like, for example, if you're finding that, it's coming back down to this deep diaphragmatic breath. So when you're inhaling, you always want the breath to feel like it's expanding in the belly and the breath is expanding in and out, as opposed to moving up and down. For some people, maybe they'll find that actually when you're trying to take a deep breath, that the breath is still moving up here and you just can't get it down into the belly because it's not been used like that for quite a long time. So things that you can do every single day, which are really, really helpful and are really good to do with kids as well, is actually lie down on the ground with your belly on the ground. So your head is on the floor, and you can support your head with your hands, make a little pillow with your hands. And then just breathe with your lower abdominals and the pelvis and the hip, and just feel the muscles going down. So they're pushing the ground away. When you start to do that, then you start to encourage this more lower abdominal belly expansive breath, which is going to immediately, do that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day. You will start to feel calmer. And so what I've noticed, over the last, which is why I kind of teach in a very different way, and I have a very gentle approach with the breath work and with conscious connected breath work, and with any breath work, is that we live in a very anxious world, and anxiety is I've never seen anxiety with my clients in the way that I do now. I guess because I work on the front line every single day with clients, I get to really see it because everyone's very good at sort of hiding it, stress and anxiety. And so it's these little tools and these little tips of how you can just bring the breath slow, make it, not necessarily taking a deep breath, but just mindfully, am I breathing in my belly? Am I breathing in my rib cage? And am I just consciously doing that even just for a minute, just when you can and where you can. So it becomes more like a way of life. You're not making it, it's not another chore. This is something that you're just, I'm aware of how I'm breathing. I'm always checking in how I'm breathing all the way throughout the day. And then it just becomes something that's just like, it becomes like a way of life.
But it does feel like, we just do it so often. It is so rare that you actually do draw that attention, unless you're lucky enough, like yourself, that's your job. But it's just hard to remind yourself.
Yeah, we're inhaling and exhaling 20,000 times a day. Yeah, we're not always aware of how we're breathing or the way that we're breathing. It's not taught. It's not on the curriculum for school. But my goodness, if we could all, if everybody in the world could start the day just with their breath and consciously connecting with their breath, then I think it would resolve a lot of issues. The other thing as well is that breath is free and it's there and it's really empowering and it's there and it's right under your nose. And you can change your states at any given time. When you're feeling anxious, you can use the breath to help you to feel calm. If you're feeling tired, rather than having a coffee or chocolate, you can use the breath to feel energized. If you're feeling really scattered and you can't gather your thoughts, you can use the breath in another way to help you to feel really grounded. But it's not something that businesses or companies or can sell in a bottle. So it's you look at media and you look at what's being fed to the world and you look at this fear and we need more and we could just hack this, hack that, buy this supplement, blah blah blah. It's actually, you've got this really fantastic tool which is there underneath your nose, and it's our breath. And really it's just like, if everybody started to just start with the breath rather than with, what have I got to do today? Have I got to, it's just like speed. We're not evolved to go at the pace that we're going at the moment. We're just like, technology is just making people just go at a pace that's, I don't think is what we're not evolved for. So using the breath is really good for creating that pause that we need in between the stimulus, and so that we can respond as opposed to react. And then that has that ripple effect. It's just,
well, without feeling guilty about it, which is, of course, the risk here, isn't it? When you start talking about doing things wrong, you start saying, oh, no, it's my fault. But without feeling guilty about the fact that we are clearly not optimizing these breathing patterns, give us a quick checklist, just a few ideas here. We've got holding the breath, we've got the belly breath, we've got the chest breath. Give us a quick checklist of where we often go wrong. What is the right way to breathe and why?
Well, just like I said, really at the beginning, it's just like noticing the movement and how you're breathing and the way that you're breathing. Noticing if you're clenching your jaw a lot. So those things like that, massaging your jaw every day can really help to release tension. Natural mechanism of a sigh and a yawn helps you to release tension in your diaphragm. And don't overcomplicate it. I think it's sometimes we're just like, and that's the thing, it's like, oh, I must be doing it wrong. I must spend this many hours, 4 hours a day meditating before I can reach enlightenment. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It's actually, just here's your diaphragm here sitting under your rib cage. It's this dome sheet muscle. And if you just start to make friends of your diaphragm and just imagine that the breath is expanding in and out every day, just really focusing, just start there, then you're really going to start to feel some changes. And those things of like with when people, like I say, with air hunger, or feel like you get tension in the chest or tension in the throat, or feel like you're getting butterflies, it's really noticing how experiences affect our physiology. So sometimes with feelings of excitement, we can have butterflies, but sometimes feelings of nerves can also feel like we have knots in our tummy. Observe what is happening in your body. Observe sometimes if you get a little hot, or the throat is tightened because you were just about to speak and you felt nervous. When you start to observe that, and then you start being actually, okay, this is what's happening in my body, this is how I'm feeling, this is the thought process that's coming in, just stop and just be with the breath and notice it, and notice what's happening in the body, because what's happening in the body is your nervous system is responding. And it's, in those times when it's going into flight or fight, then you can just sit with it and just be with it and just take a pause and just breathe. And when you breathe into that, then you can start to change that state. It's just every day, just those little kind of, oh, there I am again in that thought. Oh, there I am again in that my solar plexus is feeling quite tight. Oh, okay, I'll just see if I can just stop and just breathe in for a count of 3 and exhale for a count of 3. Inhale for a count of 3, exhale for a count of 3. Stay with this feeling, be with this feeling. I'm not trying to push this feeling away, because that's what we try and do. We generally, when those feelings come, we try to push them away. But actually being present with that feeling, then underneath that feeling is probably another feeling. It's like underneath anxiety, there's normally something underneath that that can be processed. Often I find with anxiety that there can be unprocessed grief or unprocessed anger, unprocessed sadness.
Definitely. And I wanted to come back to trauma now, although maybe we should rename it stored memories, unprocessed memories, like we just mentioned again. Now, I have no idea why, but when we did our session, I had lots and lots of images come up when I was free associating, really don't understand why, but they were painful, traumatic experiences from my past. And it felt a bit like a good sweat. It was as if the breathing was bringing old toxins to the surface to remove them. Now, a theme you've referred to a lot, you mentioned it at the beginning, it's there in the name of your book as well, is letting go. Is it sort of clearing, releasing, which obviously has great psychological value in terms of letting go of our pain or of our fears or of any bad experiences that seem to be stored in the body. Again, we don't fully understand that. But we don't really need to know where they're coming from. We just need to get them out. So talk us through this, what you call letting go of the breath, and how it really does just clear and release these physical symptoms of trauma.
Yeah, and also let's just reframe it as well. We're not trying to push anything out. It's not something that's bad inside us. Sometimes I hear people go, oh, I've got this inside me, I need to get rid of it. It's almost like, this is part of you. This is something that, rather than, it's like, hold it in the way that you would a child. Hold that feeling, hold that emotion, hold that fear, hold that anger, hold that heaviness in the way that you would a child, and breathe into it, and until the energy of that starts to change. And when we work with the breath, and we work with it on a more therapeutic level, because that's what it is. It's a breath therapy, conscious connected breath. When we talk about trauma, and we talk about like the roots of like where it came from, rebirthing, holotropic breath, Stan Grof, Leonard Orr, who really the pioneers of breathwork. Obviously, as in conscious connected breathwork. Breathwork's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and all of these techniques have been around for thousands of years. But at the time, they were working with trauma and working with higher states of consciousness, but through psychedelics, and understanding how we can access part of this unlocked. We can unlock some of this memory that we have buried, because sometimes for a really good reason, again, because our body is trying to protect us. So that's when we're working. So when they were working with psychedelics, that's when they came across this, actually working with the conscious connected breath method start to come in. And then they understand, and then they had this sort of epiphany moment that actually we can get to those states without these plant medicines or psychedelics. We can get to these states just by using our breath. And so in that way, if you think of when we're starting to disarm the nervous system, we are accessing other parts of the brain, other parts of our mind. Our brain, our mind sometimes will store. This is why sometimes I couldn't remember so much of my childhood. There was so much that I had blocked, pushed away for a very, very good reason, because it was too traumatic. So I had to there's stuff that I went through that has taken a very long time to unravel, and for my body to allow my nervous system allow me to remember in a safe way. And when we're working with these techniques, it's like EMDR, breathwork, psychedelics, different therapies that are more, somatic body work, working with these therapies. If it's helped really well, then we can help to unlock those stored memories and help to process them in a way that we can hold them as we would in a loving, compassionate way. So yes, with it's not, there's still so much research where we're sort of accessing the brain and understanding what is happening in the brain when we're having those when we're unlocking some of those memories. And sometimes actually and it's really good, to also reference this as well. Sometimes we don't have to go into the story. Sometimes we will feel emotion that's coming up, or we will feel this release and have no idea why we're crying as well. And sometimes we don't need to always go into the story, and we don't always need to analyze it as well. And it's just, we don't have to push for those stories too.
And in that sense, you're not being re-traumatized by the memory itself. It could just be purely a physiological process.
100%.
You mentioned the EMDR. We've got a great episode on that, where really we talk about just how wonderfully physiological and fast and direct this is, without these really long and often painful process of intellectually combing through all of these experiences, which might actually have no resolution whatsoever. But really interesting point there, Bex, about you saying that, we can't just see this as a removal of some sort of demon. It's like these are our experiences. We have to take possession of them. I think it was Jung who was saying, you can't remove complexes, but you can learn to live with them. And I think in some sense, part of that acceptance process has to be coming to terms and accepting this as part of your history.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's that thing of having that deep acceptance. Having that, it's, for me, from my experience, some of my experiences, for some of my darkest experiences, they have been my greatest teachers and have given me so much knowledge, wisdom, and
opportunity to transform.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I am grateful that it happened, but also equally I accept it, and I have learned to move on and work with it. And it's but it's like, that's why it's really important when I'm working with the breath and I'm working with people, generally I'm working just with breath awareness and working sometimes just with touch, and that is just enough. And sometimes that can just be enough for people to release, and sometimes for these memories to come. And because once you open some doors, you can't close them. And also it's, if people are pushing people too far to get that release or to have this cathartic release, and then they just send them back out into the world and they've all of a sudden unlocked this memory, it's like, what do I do with that? And I think it's really important to say that there's an awful lot of people that are fast tracking this work or teaching it, and who with no experience at all, who are re-traumatizing people, and not holding it safely, and saying sort of woo-woo new agey things such as, oh, it's all perfect, and it's just, you just have to trust the process, and or your soul chose, all of these things that are just really unhelpful. You know, I
Each to
could
their
go
own.
on.
Each to
Yes,
their
but
own.
there can be a lot of bypassing, it's just it doesn't need to be this painful experience. It's just allow the process. If you're working with the breath, if anyone is pushing you or forcing you, then remember this is your body and this is your experience, and you really practice your yes and your no, and not if someone tells you that you should be fainting or you should be hyperventilating, because that is just, it's dangerous.
Now, obviously, we also have not only the benefits towards these negative experiences, but we've also got these incredible improvements. Some of them you've mentioned already. Let me just give you the list, and we'll take a few of them out one by one. Mm-hmm. Improvements in resilience, confidence, concentration, restorative sleep, and immunity, which you mentioned, often associated with these detoxifying and restorative processes. Tell us what's going on with a few of those from your research. I mean, we've mentioned confidence. What do you mean by resilience, for example?
Well, I think if we have a strong or we have a good relationship with our nervous system and a good understanding, and we nurture our nervous system, and we're not being triggered all the time, then we can definitely be more resilient emotionally, mentally, physically in life. I mean, it's all so connected. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, doesn't it? What about sleep? You mentioned it briefly. Why is sleep improved?
With sleep, again, I think that's what's like, if we're wired, if we're in that state of sympathetic, then it's our body is still on guard. Sometimes we'll have moments when we wake up at 2 a.m. and mind is racing. And so, again, it's not just conscious connected breath. Using different breathing techniques can really help you to help with your sleeping patterns. And again, it's just nervous system, really is. And also like the hormonal changes that we go through, and being a woman, going through menopause, all of those things that, that start to really sort of mess around with some of these things too. It's just using the breath is a really powerful tool for that. I'm
really particularly interested in immunity. We've got a great episode that talks about with several episodes on the microbiome, and how it's interesting that this sort of this diversity of species creates a load on immunity. But I've never heard of something like this having an effect on immunity. What are you advising, and how does it work? It sounds brilliant.
Okay, so when you're breathing through your nose and not through your mouth, so in everyday life, we should always be breathing through our nose. And when you breathe through your nose, you produce something called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is a natural immune defense, which we produce naturally, which fights viruses and bacteria. So you have in your nasal pathways, when you're strengthening the nasal pathways and you're warming the air as it's coming down into your lungs. Some people will have that habit of just breathing through the mouth a lot, but if you're practicing breathing through the nose, you can help to strengthen the stamina of your lungs and the whole of the respiratory system, but you're also producing nitric oxide, which is, isn't that amazing that we can do that? And then obviously when we're working with you're working with your breath flow, your air flow, but your cardiovascular flow, but also your lymphatic flow. If we are in a state of flight or fight, the message from the brain to the body is to promote inflammation. And so that's because it thinks that our body is under attack. So if you're breathing and you're using a deep diaphragmatic breath and you're stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system, or you're reducing stress in your body, then you're going to be boosting your immune system. It's so important.
It's the rest and repair system, isn't it?
Yeah. And also when when you're thinking about the breath and you're thinking about your digestive system, your gut is your second brain. There's millions of neurons that are communicating. It's not just the mind that's managing, neurotransmitters from the heart to the gut to the brain, all of this communication that is going on, and all of this intelligence. Serotonin, 70% of serotonin is produced in the gut, which also helps to produce melatonin. When you're breathing well, you're going to be all of the systems in your body are going to be uncompromised. When you're in a state of flight or fight, the systems that the message is, it's to prioritize contracting the muscles, blood pressure to rise, respiratory system to speed up. That's so the other systems of the body, endocrine system, lymphatic system, reproductive system, digestive system are not, there's not that balance of communication. So, it's this real driving force that's helping our overall health. And also, when you think about when you're breathing in that way, you're massaging all of your organs in your body as well. So, and like I said earlier, 60% of your lymph nodes are situated underneath your diaphragm. So, you're giving your whole internal system and your organs a really good massage.
On the fight or flight thing, I find it so absurd that we spend all these millennia surviving against, ice ages and tigers and bears and stuff. But our fight or flight system would have been stimulated far less often. And here we are in the modern culture where we've got a product for every single solution. We don't have to worry about anything. It's all about, thriving rather than surviving. And here we are with a serious excess of fight or flight response leading to a chronic stress-related disease across the board, well, particularly the Western world, interestingly, the most
big
advanced
money
and civilized.
Yeah, being stressed is
Isn't
making some people incredibly wealthy.
Right, but isn't it ironic, with all of our progress, with all of our knowledge, with all of our success, that we haven't noticed how bad that is for our health?
I think we're getting there, and I think people are getting there. I mean, I think since, the whole pandemic, something really changed, and I think people just all of a sudden had this awareness of big opportunity there, and having this awareness of really stress, but also the breath and our respiratory systems, and then just sort of, because everything started to become so much more online, all of this knowledge as well. And I think, when I was teaching breathwork 15 years ago, people used to laugh at me, like, what do you mean you're teaching people to breathe? It's just like, and now it's people, I work in corporates, I work with, in environments that going into offices, or working in finance and in trust funds, and in tech companies, and everyone gets it.
It's proven to improve performance, just as meditation is now being
100%.
Companies.
Yeah.
You also speak about evidence from this fascinating research from Nobel Prize winner Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who discovered telomeres, which are crucial for cell division, DNA replication, and thus for the process of aging. Trust us aesthetes of the modern world to be interested in that. So I think her research shows that the meditation and breath work influence the length and the health of the telomeres. Is that correct? Tell us about her study and what it means for those practicing these things.
Yeah, I think that was a study that was in 2012, or was quite a while back, but it's a study over 4 years of people that meditated and people that didn't, and how the people that were meditating every day for 4 years, the telomeres, which are the caps on the end of chromosomes, so they shorten over time with cell division, and so how they would actually lengthen. And so that was just, so that helps the whole aging process, and so that's how it's proven. When you meditate, when you have a less busy mind, then you're helping to regenerate the cells in your body, which is
so that hasn't actually been tested with breath work specifically. That's only
breath work is meditation, so it depends on what you want to call, how vast, breath work is. That's how I teach, my Let It Go, but really it's more about breath work and it's more about meditation. There's so many different types of breath work. So yeah, I think when you think about conscious connected breath work, is more of a dynamic meditation. So in the way that when you're working with conscious connected breath work, you're helping to clear those patterns so that then you can really expand your meditation practice or your yoga practice, because you're not carrying all of this stuff, this baggage, this these stories that we're carrying inside, and so therefore it's a lot easier to have that experience of a meditation where you're not feeling that you're kind of watching the clock thinking much longer have I got to meditate for, just actually you can go into a deeper state of relaxation.
Now, the list of ailments you've been treating using this technique is really long and sometimes surprising. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma, perhaps less surprising, but autoimmune disease, panic attacks, depression, you already mentioned, and addiction. That could be a little bit more surprising. I mean, it's just so far reaching. Are you ever surprised by how many things this can actually touch and improve?
I'm surprised and in awe every day of the transformation that can happen when people work with their breath. It's so beautiful, and it's such an honor.
Any other random conditions to add to that list?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many wonderful and weird and wonderful stories, and some, things like people with agrophobia, people who can't get out the door, even get out of the door, people who have claustrophobia, people who have very, very high anxiety or deep history of abuse, PTSD. So, and the autoimmune disease, I think because with the complexities of that, and again, this is really important. So there's lots of contraindications to conscious connected breathwork. So some people that I'm working with, and it's really important that people, when they're teaching conscious connected breathwork, that they always share those contraindications, because there are certain medical issues and mental issues as well, such as schizophrenia, split personality. I mean, the whole list is on my website, Breathing Tree, but also high blood pressure. If you've got ME, chronic fatigue, symptoms of long COVID, I wouldn't recommend that you did conscious connected breath. I would go and do some other breathing techniques with myself or other people. It's really, really important that, because there's sometimes that it can overexert your physiology, and it can and not have the best effect. So yes. So I actually always work with people. I tailor how I work with people. It's not a one size fits all approach by any means. It's all individual, but yeah, I mean, there's stuff that has happened, but also that maybe people that just wouldn't believe. But yeah, you can read it in my books, and you can read the stories, and that's why some of my clients have shared their stories, and some really, really beautiful stories in there of how it's changed people's lives. But I think I think people can understand why it helps with anxiety and it helps with panic. I just stick with the autoimmune as well. It's just like, if you're working a certain way with the breath, then you're going to really help your body systems.
Oh, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. Let It Go is your I think it's your second book, or is it the third book, but one of them had 2 editions?
Yeah, no, it's my third. So I wrote and Breathe very long time ago, 8 years ago, and then I did an Audible practical guide, which is called Breathe, a practical guide to breathwork, and then Let It Go. And I've got another one in the pipeline at the moment, which is
right, because that's what I was going to ask. What's next? I mean, you're traveling a lot to speak and to teach. Right, you're doing a lot of workshops, but what's next? You're saying there's another book on the way. What's this?
So there's another little book, which is in the pipeline, well, maybe 1 or 2, which I think the thing is with breathwork is I'm always learning, and I'm always finding new information to share and ways to teach. And I'm opening a training school next year as well in November, because I always get asked by people, how can I become a facilitator and when are you going to teach? So yeah, I'm starting a training school in November next year.
No small feat to run a school.
No, and yeah, so it's obviously, I generally I like to keep mixing it up, but also making sure that I practice what I preach and create some space somewhere in between. But yeah, that seems to be what's happening at the moment.
Well, many of the best teachers on the planet would say that they are learning until the end of their lives. So you should keep updating what it is you're teaching, or otherwise it wouldn't be up to date, would it?
I know. I think I'll probably be teaching this forever until my last breath.
Do you have any idea when this next book will be available, or is it still simmering?
Probably sometime next year.
Okay, well, keep an eye on the website. Just say your website again, Bex.
It's breathingtree.co.uk.
Yep. All of this will be in the show notes. It remains for me just to thank you for your time, Rebecca Dennis.
No, thank you very much.